Sahano punaktu sahaviryam karvavahe tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May He protect us, may He sustain us, may we grow our strength together, may our study together be fruitful, and may we not hate one another. Om peace, peace, peace. So, good evening, welcome to the class. We are in chapter 2 of the Katha Upanishad. In the first chapter, it told the story about Nachiketa, a little boy whose father was performing a particular sacrifice which involved giving away all his possessions. And as Nachiketa watched the sacrifice, he realized his father was just giving away all his junk, all his old cows that had eaten their last grass and so forth. And so then he asked his father, he was worried that if his father performed the sacrifice in such a kind of shoddy fashion, that it wouldn't produce a good result. And so he asked his father, who will you give me to? Because I'm also your possession. And he kept asking his father that question, and father got irritated, and he said, I'll give you to Yama, the god of death. So then Nachiketa, he went to the abode of Yama, the god of death, but when he got there, Yama was out. And so for 3 days, Nachiketa sat outside the house of Yama without food or anything, and until Yama returned. Now when Yama returned, then his people of his household told him that this little Brahmin boy was sitting there for 3 days without food or proper treatment, and this is considered a great sin in Hindu society. In Indian society, because the guest, Atithi, is considered embodiment of God, and particularly a Brahmin, a high caste priest class. So to treat him without proper courtesy, proper respect is considered a great fault and a great sin. So Yama was very apologetic, and so he came to the little boy Nachiketa and said, I'm so sorry you had to sit out here all this time without any proper courtesy or treatment. And so as a result, I give you 3 boons for each of the nights that you spent by my door. And for the first boon, Nachiketa asked that his father have peace of mind. That his father was very angry when he said, oh, go to Yama. And so first request was that his father would have peace of mind, that he'd come down, and then when Nachiketa returned from the abode of Yama, the abode of death, that his father would recognize him and accept him back with the same love he had before. And so Yama said, yes, that will be done. Then the next thing that Nachiketa asked was, he wanted to know how to do a particular sacrifice, which if it was done properly, would enable the person to go to heaven. And so Yama then taught Nachiketa how to perform this particular sacrifice. And Nachiketa was such a good student that Yama said, and from now on we will call this sacrifice the Nachiketa sacrifice, because you've been so good. And then the third boon that Nachiketa asked, he said there's a question. That some people say that after a man dies, he ceases to exist. Some people say that he continues to exist. He said, and Nachiketa said, I want to know the truth about this. In other words, what's the reality? What's the truth about things? And then Yama said, oh, this is a very difficult question. Even the gods don't know this. Even they were confused by this. He said, ask something else. And Nachiketa said, no, I just want to know the truth. I want to know what the reality is. And then Yama said, well, why not instead accept a long life, progeny, wealth, prosperity, pleasure, enjoyment? Enjoy the world for as long as you want. And he offered him all kinds of wonderful things, and he said you can enjoy them for as long as you want. But then Nachiketa said that no, all these things are temporary. No matter how long your life, it's only temporary. It comes and goes and will gradually come to an end. He said, all I want to know is what is the ultimate truth, that truth about man's real nature. Does he continue to exist after death or doesn't he? And so after Yama had offered Nachiketa all these different boons and enjoyments and riches and so forth, then in chapter 2, then Yama began to teach Nachiketa about the truth. It turned out that all these things he had offered, wealth and progeny and cattle and everything, it was just temptations. You see, if Nachiketa wanted the truth, or if he just wanted to have a prosperous, happy, kind of worldly life. And so after when Yama saw that Nachiketa was actually sincere, then he said, okay, and he began to teach him. And this is where what started in chapter 2. And as we mentioned, the Bhagavad Gita follows the same pattern. That the very first chapter in the Bhagavad Gita is just setting the scene. Just kind of setting the dramatic scene, and then the actual teaching begins in chapter 2. Same way, in chapter 1, we have just setting the scene, story of how Nachiketa goes to the abode of death and so forth. And then from chapter 2 on, you begin to get the actual teachings. So the very first thing that Yama said to Nachiketa was that the good and the pleasant are two different things, and they serve different purposes. Each is, however, a bondage, though not in the same sense. He who chooses the good does good to himself, but he who chooses the pleasant misses the purpose of life. And this was the very first thing that Yama said to Nachiketa, and it's basically the essence of the message of the Katha Upanishad, is that there are like two paths open towards man. The path of the pleasant means the path of enjoying the world. And the path of Shreyas, the path of the good, it means moving towards the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth about who you really are, what your real nature is, what God is, what spirit is, of trying to reach, attain this higher truth. Now the person who follows the path of prayas, the pleasant, he's drawn into the world, and because of that, his consciousness becomes physical, it becomes worldly. His whole attention is absorbed in what's going on outside in the physical world, and so his whole sense of identity, his whole sense of experience is all based on what's happening outside. And as we know, outside, you'll get some pleasure, some enjoyments, but you also get some pain and difficulties and problems and things. And so, but the crux of it is that as your attention gets absorbed in the external world, you become kind of externalized. You become physical. And this we had mentioned before, how Swami Vivekananda said that we exist as three different beings simultaneously. One level, we exist as a physical body, where the body we're aware of what's going on outside, and we experience that. Second level, he said we exist as mind. In addition to what we just experienced through our senses and our body, there's a mind there. A mind which is can attain knowledge, which seeks truth, which seeks beauty, inspiration, and so forth. And so there's a whole other inner realm, which artists, poets, scientists, people like this, scholars, this is where they really live their life. And then finally, as Swami said, there's the third level of the Atman, or the spirit within us, and that's Atman. The word Atman, it means self, because that's the real self in each person. It's who we really are. Now, Swamiji said that all three of these levels are in us every moment, simultaneously, but what we become in practice depends on where we attach our attention. So if all of our attention is focused outside at the external world, our consciousness, it becomes essentially physical. If our attention is focused on our inner world, on learning things, on understanding things, on beauty, on inspiration, on all these things, then our experience is primarily mental. The physical then kind of recedes into the background. The person isn't so much concerned with enjoying things outside as he's absorbed in learning things and in getting new knowledge and getting creating beauty and things like that. And so the mind then becomes his real identity. That he's more mind than body. And finally, at the third level, when a person goes deeper into spirit, into meditation and so forth, he realizes that the mind is here, where all these thoughts, all these ideas and concepts and things are there, but there's something else here that's aware of the mind, that's watching the mind. And so this gradually then leads into the awareness of the individual as Atman, or as eternal spirit. Because that consciousness, which is the witness of what's going on outside and what's going on in the mind, that consciousness is actually divine, infinite, God's consciousness. What we are as a human being is we are that consciousness, that spirit, that eternal consciousness, and it's become identified with the body and the mind, using the body and mind as its instruments to get experience out in the world, to experience this life, to play our part in the world and so forth. But your body and even the mind, they're only instruments. They're not the one who's using the instrument. The true self, our true nature at all times, is that eternal consciousness, which is now experiencing this world through the instruments of body and mind, but is actually something completely different. And we said before how actually this world, which seems real to us, this life which seems real, is actually just like a movie that's going on. Now, when we're identified with the movie, when we're identified with it physically, then we are kind of buried in the physical experiences. Sometimes this can be pleasant. Sometimes it can be quite fun to have a body, particularly if it's young and healthy. Other times it can be very painful. When you get sick or hurt or old or things that, then it becomes a nuisance, but you're caught in it. In the same way, the mind. The mind can do wonderful things. It opens up a vast realm of things. All the science, technology, knowledge, everything we've attained has come out of the mind. But then you realize that the mind itself is also impermanent. The mind itself changes all the time. And in the case of many people, if the mind is when the mind gets in bad shape, it creates worse suffering than you get, from physically. Many people are just in terrible lives because of the state of their mind. But underlying that is this deeper level of your spirit within, of the soul within. As you attain that, what you get is all good. What you get at the mental level is sometimes good, sometimes bad. As we know, all the technology and things we develop, every power we've kind of developed can be used for either good or bad, depending on how we use it. But when you get to the spiritual level, you're getting also into the oneness of all things. Because that inner spiritual consciousness within you, that self within you, it's the self within everybody else. And so when contact is made with that, when it's allowed to function, what Browning called the imprisoned splendor, when that imprisoned splendor is allowed to come into our experience and flow out through us, then what comes is all good, both for us and for everybody else. Now, at the physical level, we can fulfill our desire. If we want $1 million, we can make $1 million and discover we're still not happy. It didn't bring us much satisfaction. But as soon as you begin to become aware of your spirit within, that automatically brings peace and happiness, fearlessness, all these things. So this was the first teaching of Yama, is that these two paths are open to everybody. One is the path of the pleasant, where the person kind of plunges into the world, gets totally absorbed in what's going on outside, and all his attention is there, all his ups and downs, his successes and failures, all depend on what's going outside. On the other hand, the path of Shreyas, the path of the good, is what leads the person back gradually into awareness of his own inner nature. So the good and the pleasant are both open to man. A wise person prefers the good after closely examining the two and weighing their merits and demerits. A short-sighted person, however, prefers the pleasant, for he is only concerned with increasing and preserving his physical comforts. O Nachiketa, I have tempted you again and again, but you have rejected everything I offered. Near and dear ones did not tempt you, not even pleasant things. You were intelligent enough to understand that all worldly things are useless. You rejected them outright. Most people, however, are steeped in worldly life because they find it pleasant. Secular learning and spiritual learning are at opposite ends of the pole. They are different, and they have different purposes. This is well known. Nachiketa, I have found you intent on spiritual learning. I have tested you by offering you all kinds of attractive objects, but you have not shown the least interest in them. Those who are steeped in worldly pleasures think they are intelligent and that they know the scriptures well. They are like blind people being led by other blind people. They go round and round, always pursued by sorrow. They are worldly people, too attached to their families. They may also be very proud of their wealth. The world mesmerizes them, and they become childish. They think that the world they see around them is the only world that exists. They do not believe there is any other world. It therefore never occurs to them that they should perform duties preparatory to their journey to the next world. Such people come under my control again and again. So this is how far we got. The first 6 verses have been covered so far. So now we come to verse 7. So it so happens that many do not have the opportunity to hear about the self. Even among those who hear, many do not grasp what it means. In reality, very few persons are competent to teach about the self, and accordingly, those who attain self-knowledge have to be very accomplished. Thus, only a handful of persons attain self-knowledge, having been taught by highly accomplished teachers. So we see in the world that most people are after the pleasant, prayas. Few, very few indeed, care for the good, shreyas. And even among those who wish for the good, not many are qualified to attain it. How many are there like Nachiketa, who would reject sense pleasure for the sake of attaining spiritual enlightenment? Most people are happy with their physical well-being. They do not, or rather cannot, think beyond the body. Even if you talk to them about the self, they will either not believe you or soon feel bored. But this is not to say that those who hear about the self understand what the self is, let alone realize it. Only those who are able to discriminate between the good, shreyas, and the pleasant, prayas, who have always chosen the good in preference to the pleasant and have thus acquired complete self-control, are fit to receive instructions about the self. These people then have to search for a competent teacher. Naturally, a competent teacher is very hard to find, for he must have attained self-knowledge himself. Otherwise, how could he teach about the self? If a person himself is blind, how can he lead other blind people? Only a lighted lamp can light another lamp. Thus, teachers competent to impart self-knowledge and disciples fit to receive that knowledge are both in a class by themselves. Their number is indeed very small. Most people are interested in the gross. Very few are interested in the subtle. And of all subtle things, the self is the subtlest, for it has no attributes. The self is the core of your being. How can you describe it? You can describe something outside of yourself, but you cannot describe yourself. That is why the self is so difficult to explain and so difficult to understand. So this is Swami Varadananda's commentary on the verse. So many people, they never even hear about the self, or they never hear about the higher knowledge. And this is the important role that religions play. That they provide people with access to the knowledge that at least there's something beyond just a physical existence, that there's some kind of higher reality. Now, for most people, it's usually a sense of heaven or something else, and they also, but they remind people that there is something more than just the worldly life. And this is the first kind of stage, is to hear about the truth. If it was not for the religions and that have come particularly out of the great spiritual people like Christ and Buddha and Krishna and Ramakrishna, all these, if it's not for these great teachings, nobody would even, it would never even cross anybody's mind. Everybody would be just purely a physical person, living just a purely physical life and not thinking beyond anything else. And so, as Swami Vivekananda said, that the incarnations, the God-men that we hear about, are really, that's only a very small number. He said, always there have been many God-men that we never heard about. They just were meditating in a cave somewhere or doing something, and we're not even aware of them. But Swamiji said that because of these, there's always been God-men in the world. Because of that, all the consciousness of all of mankind has been uplifted. He said, if not for that, we would have descended to the level of the brutes. In other words, we would become totally physical, not much different than animals. So when a person realizes this truth, he then, as it were, sends out light that affects everybody else. And the point is that to be a real teacher, a true teacher of this knowledge, one has to attain the knowledge oneself. One has to actually experience it. Yeah, I mentioned before how if you want to learn about Vedanta, about Hinduism, or you want to teach it, the place to go is not to the books written by professors, but to the conversations and teachings of the realized souls. When you read books on Advaita Vedanta and things like this, it's very complicated, very difficult, and it seems very kind of metaphysical and abstract. But when you read the teachings of spiritual people who realize it, it's very simple, direct, inspiring, and clear. And so the true teacher is not just somebody who knows scriptures, who has read all the books and can quote them back. The real teacher, what they call the guru, is somebody who's realized that reality himself. And then he has the capacity not only to talk about it, but to actually transmit it to other people. And it's like everybody in the world is carrying a torch. But all of our torches, none of our torches are lit, so we're living in darkness. Whereas a guru, a real guru, somebody who's realized this truth, he's like touch God. And now his torch is lit, and he can then light somebody else's torch. So that, but ordinary teacher, just a scholar, you can't do that. Once somebody asked Swami Varadananda, one of Ramakrishna's disciples, what's the difference between you, when you give a talk, and when somebody else, a scholar, pundit, or somebody gives a talk? And Swami Varadananda said that when a pundit gives a talk, it's just words. And then maybe it's inspiring words, maybe it's beautiful words, maybe you don't listen, but it's just words. But when we speak about the truth, the veils of Maya, the veils of ignorance, they're gradually being removed. Because it's like if you sit in the presence of a fire, you get the light and the heat automatically. So if you ever sit in the presence of like a realized soul or a really spiritual person, you are automatically kind of uplifted, and that light begins to come into your consciousness. So, but both are very rare. The teacher who can do this, the teacher who's actually realized this truth, is very rare and very hard to find, but also the qualified students that we see, for example, in the life of Sri Krishna, that he was a tremendous fire of spiritual knowledge, of spiritual light, but yet very few people came to him. And his experience was that people would come, and somebody come along with some of their friends, and maybe the person who came, he was interested. He was kind of spiritually inclined. But he said the other people who were kind of more worldly, they would sit for a few minutes and say, well, I'm going to go look around the temple. So most people, even if you were able to give this, most people are simply not interested, because they're not interested in the kind of transformation that it tends to bring about. So the combination of a qualified teacher and also a qualified student is very rare, and when it happens, it's like a wonderful thing. So then in verse 8 it says that if a person with a materialistic bent of mind teaches about the self, and this is self with a capital S, the spirit, the Atman, teaches about the self will never be understood. There are many misconceptions about the self. The right teacher is he who sees himself as Brahman. When such a teacher teaches, the disciple has no more conflicting thoughts in his mind. Otherwise, if someone, by reasoning, establishes the self as fine, another person, in the same process, can establish it as still finer. But the self cannot be known this way, by reasoning. And then it says that unless the teacher himself has had a direct personal experience, he is not competent to teach about the self. He may be intelligent otherwise, but without direct experience, he cannot know about the self, which is outside the world of sense experience. The subject of the self is very controversial. There are many views about it. One view is that the self is the body. Another view is that it does not exist. Yet another view is that it is the active agent in a person. There are thus many conflicting ideas. Then how can one know the real self? One has to go to the right teacher. But who is the right teacher? The right teacher is one who knows that his self is the self of all, and that he is no other than Brahman. This is what the scriptures teach. And he realizes this from his own experience. When he has this experience, all doubts about the self are dispelled from his mind. He knows that he is Brahman. It is a conviction that nothing can shake. The whole world may laugh at him, but he knows what he is. It is not an intellectual conviction, it is a transformation of his personality. The same change takes place in the disciple when he is taught by such a teacher. No wonder such a teacher is rare to find. The existence of the self is not a matter of argumentation, it is a matter of realization. It is a direct and personal experience. Arguments can lead to one kind of conclusion about the self, but more arguments may follow that will completely demolish the conclusion arrived at earlier. Once and for all, it has to be understood that the self is beyond all argumentation. So when they speak of someone as a knower of Brahman, it's not knowledge in the normal sense. As you mentioned, in other words, you don't know God. You can't know God through books, through lectures, through talks, or even through reasoning, because God is not a concept. God is a reality, and the only way you actually know God is to experience that reality. When that experience enters your consciousness, then it completely transforms you. It transforms you, it transforms your whole understanding of reality and so forth, and makes you a completely different person. And so it's only by that direct experience that a person can get that knowledge. Throughout history, there have been many attempts by different philosophers, different theologians, to try to prove that God exists, or ultimately to prove that God doesn't exist. But no matter what argument you use, there's always somebody who can come up with a different argument. And like that reason, and this we see in science, reasoning takes you so far. It points you so far, but then something else comes along. And then now your whole understanding, your whole belief is kind of disrupted. And so this goes on. One person proposes this theory, another person proposes this theory, and they argue back and forth, and it never gets decided. But now ultimately science, the search for truth in the world, is based on data. It's based on evidence, on facts, and then out of that, the theories come. So now if a new experience comes, new data comes, then the previous theories are changed. They seem to be false. In the same way, when it comes to Brahman or God is generally something nobody's experienced. Very few people have experienced, and so trying to reason from our ordinary, everyday understanding, our ordinary, everyday experience, trying to reason about it, ultimately kind of is futile because it doesn't, until the experience is there, we don't really know anything about it. And when the experience comes, then you say, oh yes, this is true. And you're fully, completely convinced that this is the truth. So the real kind of knowledge of Brahman, or any real knowledge about God, is something that comes from within your own consciousness. It can come in stages. It can come kind of bit by bit, but gradually what comes there brings with it a sense of truth, a sense of reality that, oh, this is it, this is right. And when a person has experienced that, then nobody can convince him otherwise, because he knows this is true, this is the reality. So only the one who's experienced Brahman is actually a knower of Brahman, and is the only one who could really teach it. And like I said, he's got the capacity not only to talk about it and explain it, but literally to transmit, to communicate it to the student, if the student is ready. And this is our part, and this is all the kind of spiritual practices and disciplines, things are all mainly preparing ourselves to be ready so that the truth can come in. Sri Ramakrishna said that the breeze of God's grace is always blowing, but you have to unfurl your sail. God's presence is always there. The reality of God is always there. So he said it's always right in our consciousness. It's nowhere else. It's right where we are right now. But until we kind of prepare the ground of our mind and senses, that it doesn't come in. It's like the sun is there, it's completely shining, completely bright, but if all your shades are down, you sit in gloom, you sit in the darkness, you don't see any light. In the same way, our spiritual practices, meditation, things like this, are kind of trying to raise our shades so that the light, which is always there, that can begin to come in. And as it comes in, it begins to completely change and transform our whole experience. And gradually it's moving our consciousness from being totally absorbed externally, gradually is being drawing the consciousness deeper within, because it's only deep within our own inner self, our own inner consciousness. This is where you find God. He's not up there somewhere, he's not up in heaven or on a planet somewhere, he's within each individual's own inner consciousness. So the existence of self is not a matter of argumentation. It's not something that you can prove by reasoning, because it's something a data, something that has to be experienced. Otherwise, you have no idea what it actually is. And that true knowledge, it begins to come to the person as, first of all, as kind of as communion with God, as a unfolding kind of revelation coming from within that gradually begins more and more, open up more and more of the truth. So in verse 9 it says, "O dearest, you have a fine insight into the self, but you have not arrived at this through reasoning. You have attained this from instructions you received from someone who did not depend upon reasoning, but studied the scriptures and then realized the self. Nachiketa, you have truly understood the nature of the self. May we have more seekers like you." So in order to know the self, one has to go to a competent teacher. But who is a competent teacher? He is one who has realized the self. As mentioned in the scriptures, you cannot know the self through reasoning, but neither can you disprove the self through reasoning. Reasoning is good, but reasoning for the sake of reasoning is not good. Above all, reasoning should be constructive. Reasoning to understand the meaning of the scriptures is beneficial. The scriptures teach us truths explained by the greatest men. But in order to understand what these truths mean, they have to be experienced. Any fool can challenge those truths, but in doing so, he may be talking nonsense. Is it necessary to take serious notice of what he says? Is it not a waste of time to counter his arguments? The test of the pudding is in the eating. The self has to be realized, not argued about. Yama has warned Nachiketa about this. He is now satisfied to see that Nachiketa has the right attitude. And Yama understands that Nachiketa himself is a good student and has also had a good teacher. Any teacher is happy when he has a good student, and Yama is happy to have a student like Nachiketa. This is why he says that more students like Nachiketa would be welcome. So again, we have the combination of Yama, who's a qualified teacher, and Nachiketa, who's a qualified student. So then verse 10 says that I know that wealth, as well as all fruits of work, are transitory, and you cannot attain the eternal self by using such transitory things. I knew this, yet I performed Nachiketa's sacrifices and was rewarded with this position of Yama. This position is eternal only in a relative sense. So Yama, the god of death, he narrates how he attained a place in heaven, and also how he acquired the position of Yama. He had performed the fire sacrifice, which he has just named after Nachiketa. This sacrifice involves the use of many transitory objects, including animals. The use of transitory means, however, can produce only transitory results. The Nachiketa sacrifice can admit you to heaven and also qualify you for some special powers, but these are only pseudo-eternal gains. They are not really eternal. Sooner or later, your tenure as Yama, or even the period of your stay in heaven, comes to an end. Yama now regrets that he had at one time aspired to being in heaven, or being in the position of Yama. Such temporary rewards are nothing compared to self-knowledge. Yama is sorry that he preferred such small things. In comparison, Nachiketa is more judicious. He has rejected everything that is short-lived. Yama compliments Nachiketa for not having been tempted by heaven or the position of a god. Nachiketa has consistently stuck to his request for self-knowledge, and this is proof of the kind of person that Nachiketa is. So Nachiketa is the god of death, but even that, even though it's relatively seems immortal by our standards, even that is temporary. And this is in Hindu mythology. As you know, you have all the different gods, Indra and Yama and all the, and they're kind of like cosmic bureaucrats. The different gods are like a soul. who has attained a very high level of attainment, of achievement, and so he not only goes to heaven, but he may become one of the kind of cosmic powers in the universe, being put in charge, like manager of death, the Yama. And so, like that, they're different, and different souls will come. One Yama, when his term of service is over, when he's kind of exhausted his good karma, his merit, and then he sort of retires as Yama, and another soul will take that position. And there's a story about Indra, who's king of the gods, and there was a brand new Indra. He had just attained that position, and he had all plans, building new temples and mansions and all kinds of things. And then Krishna, he appeared to him, and he showed him a tree, a bush with like raspberry blackberries on it. But then when he looked at the blackberries, he saw that each one was a previous Indra. That so many different Indras had come, and so many had all these plans, grandiose plans and everything, and he realized that he was just one in like a long stream of Indras. So like that, these different gods are still within Maya, within the temporary universe. They haven't attained the ultimate goal. And that ultimate goal is to know yourself, because that self is not bound by time, it's not bound by space, it's not bound by the changing things. It doesn't depend on kind of changing circumstances. And so ultimately this is the thing that is the ultimate goal. And we're all, every single being, this is where we're all going. This is, whether we know it or not, this is what we're all searching for. It's trying to get back reunited with the God which was the source of our being, and find there. But the heavens, in Hinduism, they believe in reincarnation, and they believe there's different heavens and hells, but these are all temporary. Person, because he's been good, he goes to heaven for some time, or he may go to a lower realm for some time, but eventually he takes birth again and comes back to earth. So even though Yama has attained a very powerful position, a very high position in kind of the celestial hierarchy, still he realizes that he hadn't reached the final goal, the ultimate goal. He says, "O Nachiketa, you are indeed very thoughtful. That is why you are able to reject things that human beings desire most. For instance, you rejected whatever may be said to be the support of the world, inclusive of its human, animal, and environmental constituents. Sacrifices entitle you to many covetable things, including the status of Hiranyagarbha, the creator, supporter, and destroyer of worlds, and also lead you to regions where you are temporarily free from fear, and to the acquisition of supernatural powers, such as growing or shrinking in will, influencing things to happen, controlling people, and so on, and similar covetable things. You rejected each of them because you were intelligent enough to realize that they were all perishable." Then the next verse says, "Difficult to see, lying deep within everyone, hidden in the intellect, and beyond the reach of the sense organs is the timeless self. A wise person, realizing this self within himself, goes beyond pleasure and pain." So the self is not easily seen. In fact, it is not at all attainable by sense perception. You must work very hard to realize it, such as practicing self-discipline for years together. The experience of the self is not like seeing an object. You and the object you see are two separate things, but the self is not separate from you. It is your inmost being. You do not see the self. Rather, the self reveals itself to you. It is like seeing yourself in a mirror. If the mirror is clean, then you can see yourself clearly. In the same way, you must have a clean mind. That is, you have to totally withdraw yourself from all sense pleasure. There may be a coin lying at the bottom of a lake. You can see that coin if the water is calm. Similarly, if the mind is calm, you can see the self. the self is always there, but because the mind is disturbed, you do not see the self. How is the mind disturbed? It is disturbed by desires. If you can remove all desires from your mind and direct it constantly to the self, then the self reveals itself to you. This is what is called chitta shuddhi, or purification of the mind. When you attain this, you have a direct experience of the self within. It is this direct experience that takes you beyond pleasure and pain. You attain an equanimity that is never disturbed. So difficult to see, lying deep within everyone, hidden in the intellect, and beyond the reach of the sense organs is the timeless self. So a wise person, realizing this self within himself, goes beyond pleasure and pain. So this self, which is the goal of our search, for which we're all looking, it's generally very difficult to see or experience because it's not an object outside ourselves. We can look at it and say, okay, I see the chair. And it's easy to say, yes, I see the chair, I know the chair's there, and I can even understand how the chair was made and so forth. Because the chair is something different than me. And like that, yeah, I can look in the mind. And the mind can have all different thoughts and emotions and different desires, memories, all things. I can look at all those things and say, yes, okay, I understand that. I can read a book on chemistry and say, oh yes, okay, now I understand chemistry. But all this is because it's something that's taking place in the mind, but the self is not the mind. It's something different than the mind. And so that self you don't find in the external world, in the sense world, in the objects you can know through the senses, and you also even don't find it in the things you can know through the intellect and through the by forming ideas and concepts about the self. Is something that has to unfold from within. Now, as long as we're intensely grabbing hold of our experiences at the physical level, or even our emotional and mental experiences, then we're not aware of the self. Our consciousness is kind of glued onto there. But as you begin to purify the mind, which means kind of letting go of all that, detaching, kind of standing back from all that, then gradually the self begins to reveal itself. The inmost reality of your being can gradually begin to reveal itself. So this is why, for example, detachment, right, is considered one of the main spiritual practices, because it's essential. In other words, the self, the basic definition of the self, is that it's the witness. It's the consciousness which is aware of what's happening. It's not the thing that's happening. And this we talked in the Gita in chapter 13, the difference between the field and the knower of the field. The field is the area of experience. It can be physical experiences where we see things outside, or it can be mental experiences, thoughts and understandings and things. But the experience is not the experiencer. And usually in normal experience, the two things are mixed up. The body is here, the body's having, producing various experiences, and we say, I am the body. The mind is there, it's producing various experiences, and we say, I am the mind. And this is kind of the crux of our problem, is that our consciousness, which is actually Brahman consciousness, that has become identified, and this is what Shankara calls the upadis, the limiting adjuncts. It becomes identified with experiences. It says, this is what I am, and then it's not aware that, oh, I'm actually something separate. So now detachment means, instead of grabbing hold of an experience intensely, trying to really kind of squeeze all the juice out of it, instead of grabbing hold of an experience so intensely, you learn to stand back. You say, this experience is here, but I'm just watching it. I'm just a witness. I'm just seeing it. Now, as you do this, then two things start to happen. The one thing is that the experiences don't harm you as much as they did before. They don't dominate you. They don't kind of make you miserable like they did before. So if something happens, say we lose our job or something goes wrong in our life, some problem comes up, normally our immediate reaction is to get totally upset, totally worried, totally unhappy about the whole situation, totally frightened by the situation. Now, if that experience happens though, let's say you lose a job, but you don't react with fear and worry and unhappiness, and then you say, okay, that's just that. It has nothing to do with me. I'm just kind of watching it unfold. Then that experience no longer makes you miserable. And we mentioned this many times before, how really there's two elements in any experience. One is the experience itself, the other is your reaction to it. Now, as long as we react to each experience, as long as we say this experience will make me unhappy, this experience will make me upset, this experience will frighten me, as long as we react in this way, then those experiences are going to produce these effects within us. But when we can kind of stand back and just look at experiences kind of scientifically, I'll say, okay, that's there, but I'm just here, I'm watching it, then they don't dominate you anymore. It's like we mentioned that normally if anger comes, we say, I'm angry. And then we may control the anger, we may not express it, but it's very upsetting. But when we just look at the anger and say, okay, there's anger in the mind, and I'm just sitting here watching it. I see this anger go on the mind, then after a while I realize, okay, the anger's gone away. Then the anger base is still there, still in the mind, but now we're not saying I'm angry, and it's not upsetting us the way it did before. And this is one of the basic definitions of yoga. Yoga is equanimity. In other words, when you're in the right state of consciousness, actually nothing in the world can disturb you at all. Nothing can upset you, nothing can make you angry, nothing can make you unhappy. Because you realize that whatever the experience is, I'm here. I'm just like seated in the theater, I'm watching the experience, and so it's like when you go to the movie, you enjoy the movie because you know it's not actually happening. You know, when cars blow up and things like that, you know, it's just movies, just the imagination. I'm perfectly safe and sound in the theater, and I'm watching it. Now, as you start to get this kind of standing back into this witnessing position, not only does the world stop troubling you, bothering you so much, causing you pain and suffering, but you gradually start to become aware of who you really are, of what you really are. In other words, right now, we grab hold of a body, and we say, oh, I'm this body here, and then whatever the body's going through, that's happening to us. Or we've grabbed hold of our mind, and whatever state the mind is in, good or bad, that's what's happening to us. But when you start to take the position of being the sakshi, the witness, then you gradually realize, oh, there's something else here. It's not a body, it's not a mental experience, but there's something very wonderful here. This is where you begin to feel the presence of God within you, the presence of some wonderful kind of spiritual reality within you, and gradually you become more and more centered in that. And if you truly become centered in that, then nothing that goes on in the world, in your life, or anything else, nothing can actually disturb you or cause you to be miserable. You're aware of it, and you can react to it. Another thing that happens is that usually we're kind of struggling through life. We see life, we see situations, and we don't quite know how to handle it, so we just always, we try to do the best we can, but always it's kind of a struggle, and a lot of sense of not being fully able to cope with things or handle things. Now, as a person gets back more into this real self, this witnessing position, you begin to find that it begins to function. And it just knows what to do, it has the power to do it, and all the right actions just spontaneously will begin to flow. In a given situation comes, and just the words will come, and you won't rack your brain trying to think, what am I supposed to do, what am I supposed to say? It just spontaneously starts to kind of flow out of you, and without any stress or strain on your part, you realize that all the situations that come there, they're getting handled. Because your real self, the real self, it's the God within, that presence of God, it handles everything, and it will bring you whatever experiences you actually want. We go through life begging and pleading and hoping that some good will come to us or that we'll get something. But when you let go of all these desires, of all this telling God, oh, I want this, and I have to have that, and I need that, and you kind of let go of the whole process and say, okay, do what you want. And when we develop that attitude of surrender, then you see that experiences, whatever starts to come into your life, is something very wonderful. Things beyond you couldn't even dream of. Things you couldn't even imagine can begin to unfold within you. Because that whole power of God, and God is universal love. His meaning, the well-being, the happiness of all beings, that universal love, when it begins to function, without you trying to make something happen, it will begin, you begin to draw to yourself whatever experiences you need, whatever at this particular stage, it can be provided. It's like with a small child, when the mother's there, the child knows, okay, everything's in good hands, and doesn't worry. And like that, our life becomes simplified and a constant unfoldment of joy. And this is the other thing. Another thing that happens is that the very world, the very life which was full of drudgery and kind of boredom before, it begins to unfold as a wonderful kind of divine play. As you begin to see the presence of God in everything, in all beings, this whole world, it becomes a kind of a thing of great beauty. And that beauty, that divinity of things, it begins to unfold more and more and more, and without limit. And so, like that, we can live in a very small life and be and have our shades down and be in a very dark, gloomy place. But gradually, we can also get out of that, and then become aware of what's actually there, of what the reality is. What we're in now, whether we call life good or bad, is largely a reaction of our mind, of our personal mind. But when you can kind of let go of all of that, all your judgments and so forth, and begin to let the presence of God begin to come into your consciousness, then it all starts to unfold in its real nature, which is purely divine. So the self, the goal, the ultimate, the goal of all our search is there within every person, but it's as long as we're distracted, as long as we're holding on to the experiences that come and totally absorbed in them, we don't become aware of it. As we learn to let go of this tremendous grasping of things, of trying to get some pleasure out of it, some happiness out of it, as we learn to kind of let go of that, become more desireless, that gradually then the reality of everything, it starts to unfold from within. And the very same world, which was kind of boring before, which gave you maybe a little happiness, a little unhappiness, right? But that very same world starts to be transformed, because as your consciousness changes, your experience changes. And this, most of the time, we're trying to solve our problems, we're trying to make life better by changing the experiences, by changing other people, by changing what's going on outside. But the real change comes as we become transformed inside. And this is where you find your everything kind of falling into place. And there's just a great sense of everything being okay. Instead of full of worry and problems and concerns, you now realize more and more, everything is fine. And so that gradually unfolds, and we can live in continual happiness all the time, or we can live in continuous misery. Now, it depends on where we put our consciousness and what we develop. The more we focus our attention on the small self, the more we experience the little pleasures and unhappinesses and things of the small self. But as we open ourselves up to the divine self, then it begins to come into experience, and more, level after level, it reveals more and more of the kind of the wonderful infinite beauty and goodness of things. So this is where we've gotten up to about verse 12, I think. Yeah, verse 12 in the second chapter of the Katha Upanishad. Okay, so you see, this Saturday we're having Ramnam after our RT. So 6:30 in the evening on Saturday we'll have Ramnam here. On Sunday, Swami Varadananda will speak on why should we meditate, meditation theory and practice. And then regular classes next Tuesday, he will do the class on the Panchama Veda, on the Gospel of Sri Krishna. And Friday we'll do our class. Then next Sunday, the 16th, the HSS, Hindu Samsevik Sangha, is going to have their Dharma beat. They've got like 150 centers throughout the country, and because it's Swami Vivekananda's 150th birthday, they had this big kind of essay contest for children. I guess thousands of children come, but the grand finale is going to be at Hindu Temple on the 16th. Swami Varadananda is going to be there. I think it's going to start about 1 o'clock, and so that's going on. But it was like all of the nation, and they did prepared videos. I mean, they did a very nice job of the whole thing in honor of Swami Vivekananda and his 150th birthday. So that's coming up. Om Asato Ma Satyam Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurman Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light, and lead us from death to immortality. Om peace.